You don't buy a Jeep because you want a practical vehicle. You buy it for the lifestyle. And that's served a lot of people well. It's not a vehicle for everyone, but here today we have this two-door Jeep Wrangler out where it actually belongs, on our favorite trails and in the snow. This is a Jeep Wrangler Sport S two-door. That is just one trim up from base. And these two-doors, well, they start sort of cheap by Jeep standards at around $42K. This one here, well, it gets up to 51 for reasons we're going to get into. But what matters here is that Jeep owners have rediscovered their love of rock and knob. This is a 6-speed manual with 3 proper pedals underneath, a naturally aspirated 3.6-liter Pentastar V6, and just all the trusty solid axle, ruggedy runabout that you could want. With that though, it comes with a lot of asterisks. This is a vehicle that should be bought with some very practically grounded expectations in mind. This generation Jeep Wrangler has been around with us for a little while now, but if you're just getting up to speed with Jeeps, this is what's known as the JL. This generation Wrangler was introduced back in 2017 for 2018 model year, and they've just updated it in the last year with some modern accoutrement. They've got side curtain airbags in these things now, and an infotainment setup in the middle that doesn't absolutely suck. It's also still got a lot of hard buttons. It's very traditional. But we've got a couple different powertrain options in these things, and it remains a very modular setup despite being a very traditional vehicle underneath. This still uses solid axles front and rear. We have, of course, that manual transmission in here, but that Pentastar V6, that's been around for as long as I can remember at this point. Importantly too, it remains body on frame. That, combined with those solid axles front and rear, makes these things a very rugged vehicle off-road. Today, we're especially lucky too, because being the shorter two-door version, well, we have even better breakover angles. Normally, you're a little compromised with what you can go over in those 4 doors that everyone goes for, but here in the 2-door, well, we've got those 40-odd degree approach and departure angles, but we've also got 26/7 breakover here in the middle. I want to hit the trails today, enjoy this rainless, top-down weather, even though it's -10 or something, and just have a nice time with it. There we go. Oh, Jeeps. We've tested a lot of 4-door Wranglers on Driving.ca, but not nearly so many 2-doors. That's because, in general, the 4-door has been the more practical option, or at least insofar as a Jeep is practical. You see, the thing you've got to understand right out the door, if you're not already familiar and just think that, oh, a Jeep might be fun, well, a Jeep is a very fun vehicle, especially out here on the trails. In the everyday, though, a Jeep is not an especially good vehicle. Now, I'd say that with the utmost adoration. I love that they're a little bit podunk, that they're really simple. That rear seat that I've got folded forward right now so that I can fit my recovery gear in case something goes wrong, well, that doesn't actually hold itself up unless you use a Velcro strap through a little metal loop that pops out of the exposed bodywork. It's a lot of charming stuff. So then, you've got a vehicle that isn't particularly fuel efficient. This here, I've been doing about 14 liters per 100 kilometers. That's kind of awkward to get in and out of, that isn't the most refined, that has some more updated accoutrement, but that isn't anything particularly practical. And then, of course, something that drives around on solid axles. Now, I'm on a rough trail right now, but if it seems that I'm bouncing around quite a bit, it's because I am. These Jeeps on their solid axles do not respond like you might be used to in a regular modern SUV. SUVs nowadays, well, they use independent suspension. What that means is that when you strike a bump and the wheel sort of launches upward, well, there's a whole lot more mass that carries that inertia up, and that makes it kind of springy and bouncy, and imparts a rather shaky ride all about. Independent suspension is great for on-road comfort, but when you're out on the trails, it doesn't have quite the same reach and articulation as you get when you're just hanging a solid beam that can drop down whichever way you might hope for to keep that wheel in traction. Then, of course, there's also just the basic rigidity of it. As we get out here, I'm not too worried about it catching on anything because it's just kind of a solid beam. As rugged as that makes these things when you're out and about, though, it doesn't necessarily mean that every Jeep is a hardcore off-roader. This here is the Sport S, and part of why Jeep has made this thing available right now is, well, times are not looking so great, and people are starting to look at down-market models once again. Instead of just flocking to the $80,000 Rubicons like we've seen so many of, we're now starting to see models like this Sport S, which starts at a, frankly, not inexpensive $42,000, but is still relatively cheap as these things go nowadays. In this base trim then, we get a relatively sparse equipment list. We've got this manual transmission, which I love, but is definitely not quite as convenient in the everyday as that 8-speed automatic that's in absolutely everything, as well as in Land Rovers and Jags and BMWs and all the rest. We don't, however, have a locking differential center or front or rear. That makes things a little tricky. You see, the Rubicon models, if you get stuck, you get a wheel spinning, you can lock the wheels together, and that gives you the traction to hopefully get out without having to use those built-in tow hooks on the front and rear bumpers. Here though, if I get in trouble, well, there's a reason I've got a big heavy bag in the back with a hand winch and a bunch of ropes and straps and all other pulleys, and honestly, it's fun stuff to play with when it happens, but I'd rather not today. We've got relatively forgiving springs underneath here and a sway bar that tries its best to keep this thing steady when you're going around bends. But unlike the higher models, there's no emergency sway bar disconnect to give you extra reach if you get into serious situations or anything like that. Well, it's riding on 17-inch wheels with optional all-terrain tires. There are a couple different variants. This is ultimately meant as a bit more of a soft roader in a sense. This is a car that can go out on the trail like this absolutely confidently and competently, but that's ultimately really going to live its life in the city. And indeed, I've seen quite a few of them about Toronto in the last few years. But while not necessarily as mechanically hardcore as something like a Rubicon, this here being the two-door means a lot. Now, we have a bit of an advantage because we have the optional all-terrain tires wrapped around those 17-inch wheels underneath. But what matters more is the fact that this two-door has a shorter wheelbase, and when you're off-road, that's really advantageous. You see, long wheelbase, well, you've got more space inside, you can carry more equipment, more passengers. Yes, it's got rear seats, but they aren't especially comfortable. I can sit behind myself in them in okay-ish comfort. I'd be fine for about 45 minutes back there, but I wouldn't want to spend a longer time. But when it comes to obstacles, or even just riding over moguls like we are on this unimproved road, well, our breakover angle is significantly better, and that's massively important. You see, when we think about off-roading, we typically think about our approach and departure angles. Those figures, well, they're generally around 40-ish degrees here in the Jeeps. And those are excellent figures. Those are well above what you get in many of the competitors. But when you get into those lengthened wheelbases, well, those become a liability. Those approach and departure angles are great marketing fodder because Jeep often leads in them, especially as you get into the larger size wheels like we have here, or especially in the off-road Rubicon or Extreme Recon packages where you may have 33, 35, 37-inch wheels. There, by natural virtue of the wheels being pushed out to the extremes, and then of course the natural height that you're getting from that enlarged wheel size, well, you've got a pretty good ability to climb up onto something. But are you going to get hung up on it is the question that follows. And if you've got a long wheelbase, well, you may end up with just 20 odd degrees breakover angle. That 40 then doesn't end up meaning quite as much as you might hope. Here though, we have improved it. We're looking at 26.7 here, which is comparable to the Toyota Tacoma Turd Pro, which is an excellent vehicle on this very trail. I really enjoy the Tacos. The trade-off though is in comfort. You're probably noticing a fair bit of rocking fore and aft here as I go over certain obstacles and bumps. And this is not exactly a road where we usually feel quite so much forward and back motion. Instead of triangulating across a longer axis, everything here happens a little bit more like it does in a go-kart, and that applies to on-road handling and especially around corners as well. Jeeps have delivered notoriously poor highway handling, and while it's improved slightly with the more modern multi-link setups attaching those solid axles, they're still pretty roly-poly, especially when curving around ramps at speed and you hit an expansion joint, which unsettles the whole vehicle, makes it buck and feel like it's rolling about on top of its suspension mounts. If you're doing 120, that is a sensation that feels like you're about to topple over. Here though, you're multiplying that significantly. The whole thing feels a lot more precarious atop that same general sponginess. When I'm out and about going around corners, I've had to be a lot more mindful of how I carry speed here. And, well, yes, this wheelbase is shared by vehicles like that Mitsubishi Pajero Evolution, which I had heaps of fun with on-road and out on these trails and in the sand dunes. Well, that used independent front suspension. Here, though, we don't have the same planted composure of those driving steering wheels. But without that independently sprung composure, we just can't count on the same road holding regardless of conditions here. Really then, it becomes a question of, do you want a hatchback or a station wagon? Because dimensionally, you do have a comparable footprint in here, although, of course, with its squared off proportions, a fair bit more space. So then, two-door or four-door? Well, down here in a base trim like this, I've got to say that the two-door feels really the way to have it. This is far more nimble out on the trail. I enjoy and appreciate the confidence in my breakover angles and the ability to get out of stuff that might trip up the full-length Jeep. It's also a little bit better proportioned to my needs as a young adult without kids. This is really a two-seater that can throw some grown-ups in the back, although if you're going to be carrying cargo or rifles to the range or anything else, you are really going to need a larger vehicle because those seats have to fold down for pretty much anything. That said, if you're someone whose urban lifestyle would be well suited by the footprint of a compact or a hatchback, this is more capacious because of its squared off dimensions, while still retaining some of that as well as the general around town maneuverability that you simply will not get from the full-size Jeeps. The big boys have their place, and I really enjoy the relative stability that we get. While still not a refined driving experience, they're a little steadier. They can handle the 392 powertrain that's coming back for 2026 that frankly would probably prove deathly in a short, unsteady go-kart like chassis like we have here. As a value proposition, this is the cheaper way in the door for sure, and especially coming in some $10,000 less than what you're going to be paying for those full-size four-doors, it can be a really attractive buy. Spec it in a low trim like this, the Sport S being just a hair above the Sport, seems a good spend of about $2,000, but you can still get that manual to keep your price down and to keep that enjoyment and interface up. I am really heartened to learn that Jeep is seeing an increase in sales of these manual models as people look back to the tactility and the engagement that they've realized we've so lost in so many modern vehicles. As an answer to this age of electrification and hybridization, then, this feels like a good old boy, and it's a delightful time of that. Out here on the trail, I cannot think of a more wonderful way to be spending a Sunday afternoon right now. Top down, -7, we're just blasting along. For Driving.ca, I'm Mel Alder. For more off-road news, reviews, specs, tests, previews, and all the rest, be sure to follow us online.